and many cultures, you can't be a healer without a wound. So what's your wound? Don't hide your wound. Every one of us sitting in this circle today has a wound. Bear it with pride. Allow it to really inform your sensitivity and the way you connect with people. Work from your heart.
Welcome back to the Midwifery Wisdom Podcast. This week we have an incredible guest to share with you. Co-host Augustine Colebrook is joined by the one and only Elizabeth Davis. You heard me right, Elizabeth Davis, the author of Heart and Hands, Orgasmic Birth, as well as many other incredible books, the co-founder of NMI. She shares some of her own personal history, how she was led into this incredible work and world of midwifery and birth, her history working with Manna, the history of NMI, how it was founded, her involvement, and of course imparts her magical wisdom. Settle in with a warm drink and your heart open and ready to learn. In Elizabeth's own words, midwife is not just a noun, it's a verb, and we're going to learn all about that this week. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the podcast, and thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me and share with our listeners. So thank you.
Of course. It's my pleasure.
You probably need no introduction because you are one of our bedrock, our core leaders in midwifery for many decades now. But if folks don't know who you are, Elizabeth Davis, the author of Heart and Hands and many other exciting and amazing things. Do you want to give an overview? Because you'll do it better than I do. Do you want to tell people who you are?
Geez. Well, I guess I would call myself a pioneer, but not by intention. I had a really traumatic hospital birth in the dark ages of childbirth. I call that time the early 70s. And so bad that I couldn't find a midwife, even though I knew that I wanted one, and very few people did back then. But it was a bad birth with way too much Pitocin and tying me down, literally tying me down. So then that was followed 2 years later by this magnificent home birth that was actually an orgasmic birth that I dare not use the word for decades, lest people discredit the rest of my work,
Right.
That's my personal story, but what it did was it motivated me so strongly to do this work regardless. I felt like, having experienced the contrast and the impact on me personally, like, how could I not serve that? How could I not? And I wasn't crazy, at times I wondered, because when you're running out in the middle of the night and you have two small children at home, and if something goes wrong, even if you have no fault, you're in jail. But again, I really felt truly called to do this work. Well, I think that one of the cornerstones really of pleasure for me was the very first Manna meeting. Back in the day when Manna was truly representative of the diversity in midwifery. And I think there were probably 75 of us there. And the takeaway for me was, this is wonderful. I have a national identity. But the second takeaway was, oh my God, the midwives that are practicing legally are so much more relaxed than I am. So what do I need to do to make this happen? I was asked to be on the board as a volunteer, and was quickly guided by a couple of others on the board, Tish Damon and Carol Leonard. And they said, you have to self-certify in California. And I said, why in the world would we do that if we're not legal? And they said, because it will get you together. You articulate your bottom lines, and remember to always be inclusive. This is not an exclusionary process. Take it all over, ask for input. If anyone has a complaint, make a way for it to happen. And that translated to my call when it was time for national certification. And that's another story, but let's just say it was time to do the opposite of what the people in charge wanted to do and reach out to all the states and say, we're going to have a big meeting. It's going to be roundtables, bring your process. We're going to cut and paste, talk about what works, what doesn't work for you. And that's how we'll develop a prototype. And then we're going to take it to everybody and get input. And that process, I mean, what an incredible honor to be part of that moment in history. So,
and you were joined by some other incredible California midwives as well.
yeah.
Can you tell us who else you were working with in those early days? I think we've heard of their names.
Well, Shannon Anton, definitely. She and I co-founded NMI. Maria Iorillo was part of it. I'm trying to think. There were so many California midwives.
I know. Was it Mary Jackson a part of that time frame as well?
She was. I don't know how actively she was. I don't think she was at that meeting, but she was definitely strong in terms of wanting to move this forward. Yeah.
There's another great midwife I spoke to recently, Lily Aquarius in the Bay Area, I believe. Anyway,
I don't know her yet.
She stayed really underground. I think she knew about the licensing coming, and she stayed in the underground. But it's incredible work. And so your foray into midwifery was kind of always dovetailed with advocacy and education.
Yeah.
It seems like it's like you barely even got on your feet as a midwife before you were already midwifing other midwives.
It's true. I mean, I wrote Heart and Hands only 3 years into practice, first edition.
Right.
And
that's what I remember hearing.
And I had in the first edition, I had never even experienced like manual removal of a placenta. I actually said, according to the medical books I read, that the mother would have to be restrained because I didn't know any better.
Wow.
And when the book writing wasn't ever a commercial enterprise for me. It came out of a moment where one of the grand midwives in the Bay Area was quite jealous of my younger practice and spread a rumor that we had a death at home. Well, that can end your career. And I just started writing down everything I knew. It was almost like an act of, do I know what I'm doing? And I got into the writing and then met another author, and the author said, he read some of it and he said, I think I can get this published. And I published. I really wasn't looking for that, but once it was published, then I had doulas coming to me and saying, will you teach us skills? And then the more general interest of, will you teach us midwifery? And the curriculum expanded over time, but it's always stayed holistic, not in the way that the term is overused, but I'm really concerned when I say midwifing midwives, I'm looking at the personal growth part of becoming a midwife. Because what I tell my students pretty early on is, just about anybody can learn the skills and get the knowledge, but the personal growth to carry that much responsibility is the hard part. So let me give you this journal assignment, or let's do this practice together in small groups, or some way of keeping up internally, emotionally, with that charge. And I think that if you do that, you end up with very strong-minded but clear-headed individuals that will stay in the game.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And we've lost so many great midwives to burnout, exhaustion, car accidents, divorce, obesity, diabetes, exhaustion, and bad outcomes, and that vilifying your sibling midwives, which you alluded to. How are we going to decrease the losses? What's next? Like, this is something I'm working on right now. I'm sure you have some answers.
I do a lot of work internationally, which has also been a great honor, and it's mostly come through Midwifery Today, which also has been a grassroots movement. So we'll go do a conference in Germany, and midwives from Israel will come up and say, will you come to Israel? And Jan says, sure, find us a venue, we'll go. So, Bulgaria, Latvia, all these places where there's very little midwifery or organization. And in all of these places, if midwives get into trouble, which they do eventually, it's happening now in France for the first time, midwives are striking out for home birth and they're being arrested. They are held accountable to obstetrical standards of care. In other words, how do doctors do it? And if you didn't do it that way, you're doing it wrong. So as difficult as it might sound, articulating core midwifery standards of practice is possible. And the way I know this is after I gave this lecture in Finland, I had a workshop and there were midwives at that conference from 40 countries. And I said, let's just take a shot at this. How about who wants to volunteer to participate in articulating our standards for post-dates practice? So let's look at continuity of care as a factor in what we do. And let's look at health status of the mother in what we do. And let's include everything that's part of our practice, including our skills, which are superior for the most part to anything ultrasound can come up with. And let's see what you get. And I thought, well, there's probably going to be a lot of yelling and hollering and carrying on because can you really herd cats, But no, in 40 minutes, they knocked it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think of, I could tell you a story about the mama that was 44.5 with good dates. And I know they were good dates because I saw her at 20 weeks, measured her uterus. She was spot on. And she didn't want a midwife. And all the women in my community said, you've got to talk to her. I said, no, I don't. That's her business. If she wants to pre-birth, she can do it. But she did come to me for that confirmation of dates. And then she came to me again later in the pregnancy. I showed her how to feel the baby's head down, how to be sure of her amniotic fluid volume, which is crucial in the post-dates period. And she kept posting me, and that moment came at 44.5. And I thought, I can't wait to see a picture of this baby. Are we going to see the dismature, shriveled little infant? No, we see a pink, plump term baby. And all she had to say about that was, well, my mama went to 43 and my aunties went to almost 43. So I guess this is normal for me. And I thought, yeah, I guess it is. And it's normal in birth. And we need to find a way to let the world know, or let the country know, or let our area know that we have a way of practice. I don't think it will be that hard for us to agree upon it any more than it was agreeing on certification.
That's an interesting proposal. If we don't agree on it, I think we're headed towards a disaster of kind of epic proportions, global proportions, because I think it's possible in one generation to kind of permanently lose a body of knowledge. Do you think that's alarmist, or do you agree?
Well, I think I have to agree. Like, 5-10 years ago, I would not have agreed. But at this point, I think I would have to agree. And the one thing that when I was at the first MANA meeting, and Tish Demon, who was truly one of the leaders of the time from New Mexico, and also a chain smoker, which was not horrible back then. I would be knocked out at night after a long day of MANA meetings, and she would be leaning over me on the bed and smoking and talking to me and telling me what's what. And she said, always remember, it's not about midwives. It's about mothers and babies. It's about mothers and babies. So we can get lost in thinking we're it and fighting for us when we need. And the reason I say this is because when you bring up international, this is a global health concern. This is about life and the quality of life.
Yes.
And the more we know about,
and it's especially important because so much of the globe is following U.S. policy.
Right.
And so as the U.S. creates more and more barriers to midwifery and is more and more hostile to midwifery practice, the world follows suit.
Right. And my students are always shocked when we really dig into the research on cesarean and we look at the accreta, the incidence of accreta. Which, I could not figure that out because my understanding of how the blastocyst embeds is, it makes its journey down the fallopian tube and it launches into the uterine space, and it goes looking for the richest site to lodge, and that's usually the fundal area. So with the next pregnancy, it will go not to that site again because it doesn't reuse a site. It'll go somewhere else, but it'll keep going up, and that's why lower and lower with more and more pregnancies, there's a higher incidence of previa. But I could not figure out why this smart blastocyst, after one cesarean, only one birth, would head on down to the uterine scar. It didn't make sense. Then I thought, well, but if that uterine scar is not well prepared and the endometrium decidua is not well reunited and any of the myometrium is exposed, it's going to go there because that's a rich site. So
and also post surgery, there's a pretty traditional habit to swab out the uterus. So with fairly rough gauze, they're actually abrading the lining of the uterus, which will create this kind of like, I don't want to say scar tissue, but this less optimal place for the blastocyst to implant. So I think it actually makes perfect sense. And this added piece of there being uterine windows, or even just like you said, myometrium sticking through, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And then you've got the consequences of accreta and the rise in maternal mortality and the loss of long-term fertility and all this stuff that nobody is told. And that's, there's a huge public education aspect of what we need to be doing that I don't think we're doing effectively because people don't understand the severity of their choice. The consequences.
Well, and they just don't understand, period. Like, I mean, if you ask someone in middle America, general, like you're walking through a mall or you're walking through a town square or something, you ask someone, hey, what's a midwife? They'll be like one of three answers. They'll be like, oh, that's like a doula, right? Because the doulas have fantastic public relations. Or they'll be like, oh yeah, like that TV show called The Midwife, not realizing that it exists in America today. It's only a British thing, right? Or the third thing is they have no idea what's the midwife. And those three answers from a huge subset of the population are really devastating. That tells us that we as midwives do not understand or are not working towards public relations. And if you think of it from a business standpoint, it's a sales funnel, right? And the top of the sales funnel is awareness of your product. Nobody freaking knows.
Just keep in mind that
that's where we've got to.
Doulas, for the most part, as per the medical establishment, are not nearly as threatening as we are. So it's been much easier for them to advance. And to get funded.
Definitely.
Where we really are, where we don't, that I teach my students at the very beginning what Robbie Davis Floyd gave us in her 3 paradigms of healthcare, the technocratic, humanistic, and the holistic. And when we move into holism, which most midwives do, doulas tend to get kind of caught in humanism because they're bridging the gap between the technocrats and the holistic. But we're in holism, and that's a model of equality and transparency. And I
so beautiful.
Them, for example, like, so say you had a huge fight with your partner in the morning and you're going into a prenatal. Are you going to try to hide it and practice, quote, clinical detachment? How are you going to acknowledge your emotional state with your client? It doesn't mean process. You simply say, if you're noticing I'm a little off today, I had a rough time with my partner this morning, but I'm good now, and I'm really glad to see you. And in that, you model honesty, and you want your client to be honest with you. But if you force your client to pretend she doesn't see, that creates a separation. We can't afford that. That's how we fall into situations that maybe could have been prevented in terms of outcome. So there's so much about what we do that's magnificent and really would benefit culture.
It's magnificent. It's the word. Yeah, we'll link Robbie Davis Floyd's info in the show notes because yes, another seminary leader for sure. So tell us about the school, founding the school. How did that happen? Who did it happen with? When did it happen? Tell us all
Okay.
about that.
Well, when the law changed, and we lost control of that process in California. It was basically usurped by the medical board, who gave us the Nurse Midwifery Practice Act. And that's a long story of all the things that happened ever after that. But one of the requirements was a 3-year program. And I had been teaching Heart and Hands. Shannon Anton was my former student. She was interested in starting a school. I said, well, Heart and Hands is an integrated overview, and you followed up with coursework that was topical. So once you've got the foundation through Heart and Hands, you went on to create a segment on preeclampsia, a segment on fetal development, a segment on the liver function in pregnancy that became modules, almost like study units. We should just put our stuff together, add clinical to that. Let the students, once they have Heart and Hands foundation, do the modules in any order, according to what comes up in practice. And that was such a great idea that we went for it. And it started as Midwifery Institute of California in 95 or 96. But when we found out how hard it was to get a school accredited and pay for all of that in California, Shannon had moved to Vermont. And she found that there in Vermont, you just go into a little office with a nice person working there, and you say, well, we're MEAC accredited, and they say, great, you're in. It's only going to be $300 a year, or whatever it was. So we became the National Midwifery Institute. And as time has moved on, and I've become less able or less interested in the bureaucratic aspect of the work, I've taken a much more low-key role in the school, and I moved my curriculum into a prerequisite status. So it gives me a little bit more freedom in terms of how I evolve my course. And, anybody can take my course. And that's how it's always been. People take it to know about being a midwifery. I mean, a midwifery educator, or even just advancing their doula skills, or anything along those lines. And if you go to my website, elizabethdavis.com, you'll find my schedule. I didn't teach virtually until the pandemic. But once I got into teaching virtually, it dramatically expanded my student base. And I have much more diversity in my classroom. So I love doing it. And I've learned to do it well with Zoom. And I teach live. We break into small groups. We're not a large group, like usually no more than 12. So everyone gets a chance to talk. We have discussions at large. We have small groups, as I said. I love it. And I'm not planning on quitting anytime soon.
That's awesome. But you did, you grew with the school. I think we skipped a little chunk of data in there from starting in Vermont. Then it grew substantially. What year was that it grew so much?
That would probably be the time when MEAC accreditation became a lot more exacting. And that's a complicated topic, political topic too. But let's just say that MEAC was audited by the U.S. Department of Education, who oversees MEAC. And that caused MEAC to be a lot more precise about the requirements. And, personally, we had to hire an accreditation expert, would cost us a fortune, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of dollars. And for a lot of programs, especially the smaller ones, that became prohibitive. So more oversight, more requirements for expanded staff, maybe not all, kind of done in a rush. And, if you look at the history of programs, a lot of great programs closed around that time. And I don't know if I can give you an exact date, but I'm thinking, where are we now? It's 2023. I'm going to say maybe 7 or 8 years ago, something like that. Things really shifted. So
yeah, I think that's when Birthing Weight got subsumed by Bastille, and there were a few other major changes that year, I remember.
Yeah. Birthing Way and the program in California. Nozomi is closed, and
Yeah, Najoni closed in 2015, I think. 2017.
Mm-hmm.
I think Najoni closed in 2017. And then, of course, Birthing Way closed as well. Birthwise joined Bastyr. Some major changes. And there were a couple other schools I can't remember the name of right now. Anyway, yeah, big changes. And part of that was MEEK being dictated by the U.S. government, U.S. education.
Yes. And I didn't really, to tell you the truth, I really didn't want to start a school because I'm portfolio process all the way. I love competency-based assessment.
Yeah.
I think where it's at, that's why the one part of our program that I'm still very involved with is the challenge for the California license, which is basically like a portfolio. There is an academic component, but it's run very much the way that NARM now runs their academic component, where they cite the core areas of knowledge and you illustrate how you accomplish them. And we create pretty wide berth for our challenge applicants to demonstrate. It's not just transcript, it's self-study. It's, that, and it's the only challenge currently. And I do everything in my power to, of course, uphold the requirements of the challenge and interpret them with flexibility.
Yeah. And so then you moved on from the school, and they have a new executive director and a new director of education, and they're expanding rapidly, I think. Last I heard, big things are happening. Yeah.
Well, they're getting ready to do what really is needed to be done for a long time, and that is create instruction and instructor connection. So currently you get your modules and you do them on your own, and you can go to a meeting with an instructor sometime during the week, but it isn't necessarily on your subject matter, which is still being corrected at a correspondence level. You mail in or email your module, it's looked over and sent back to you. And that really honestly is not the standard any longer in terms of MEEK. So everything has to be either done virtually like I'm doing it, or done in some other fashion, so there's direct contact. And that's going to take a lot of overhaul. One of the biggest changes that was instituted by Katie Krebs, who is our director, was a subscription model of enrollment, meaning that instead of putting down the big bucks, you're able to enroll for a fairly low fee of, I think, $550 is your first month, and then you continue to pay. And you pay only as long as you're in the program. And one of the beauties of the program is that you have opportunity for leave, and you have up to 7 years to complete it. So if you need, take time off to have a baby or a personal emergency, family emergency, you're able to do that. Or working through your way through a smaller practice. We're trying not to force people into the huge birth. We want continuity of care. We want our students to have that experience. Nothing wrong with big birth center, getting your numbers too, but the foundation continuity of care is really important. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Wow. Brilliant. Well, so Elizabeth, I'd love to go with what's next. Like, you've done, this huge amount of advocacy work, this education, built the school, transitioned out, obviously, this book and multiple revisions of the book, speaking internationally, creating coursework. What are you doing now? What makes you really happy? What do you love right now?
Well, honestly, my daughter is making me write my life story. And I resisted that so much, because I'm like, why should I write my story? I'm still living my life story, but I'm starting to write things
That's
down.
Great.
And
That's great.
And I'm also really, really drawn to a more deeper level of doing international education, because I try to teach my students. Most of them have some degree of global identity, but probably less so in the States than other parts of the world. And if you don't have an international identity by now, you're not making it here and where we're going.
That's right.
So
That's
if
right.
I just spent a month in France, and I taught both in northern France for 3 weeks and southern France for 3 weeks, and then gave an address on posterior arrest at an OB conference.
Wow, how fun.
That's the kind of stuff I really want to do, because it's the grassrootsy thing, where it's so easy for disenfranchised people, when the carrot is dangled, here's some power for you, come on in. But showing them, no, there's as I've said, endless series of legitimacy hoops they're going to make you jump through. And in the end, you may not have the profession you thought you had or wanted at all. So how about you?
I feel like that's happening in Sweden right now so completely. They've lost so much as a result of that dangling carrot. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, but just that we created our own infrastructure in the United States with the CPM. And with the CPM, the fact that they've held to the portfolio and have more or less said, we're going to keep it as long as someone wants to use it. That's the kind of model that I would like to see everywhere. And having experienced it firsthand, I know the ropes. There was a time in Mana where we were courting favor with the ACNM. And we'd go to the conferences and have a hospitality suite and all that stuff. And we were always kind of looked down upon. And when we decided to go for a spot in the ICM, well, the vote was unanimous except for one. And that was the ACNM. They voted against our membership. And that was the point where I said, we're wasting our time. We have other work to do over here, and we can do it. Do it. That I really want people, I think that's an important aspect, and it's something really fulfilling to me, because travel is in my blood. I've wanted to do it since I was a little girl. My mom and dad gave me these stack of books when I was a kid. I don't know how they knew, but of tingling in China and somebody in all these different countries, and what the culture and like an anthropological child's experience of the world. And it just inspired me. So I feel really comfortable in that role, and I'm hoping to do that more.
We hope you'll come to India. I would love to have you here.
That would be great.
Speaking of travel, do I have an opportunity to share with you? If you've ever attended one of our Midwifery Wisdom experiences before, you'll know that at the end of each conference, we always have a retreat where midwives can relax, rejuvenate, and connect. Well, this year's retreat will be an even more incredible opportunity to really relax. This year, from November 13th through 19th, we will be retreating in Belize. The beautiful Caribbean is calling your name. It's time to unplug, unwind, rejuvenate with a group of midwives, like-minded souls who are there for the same reason. You'll be staying in beautiful beach villas with private chefs featuring fresh cuisine, adventures, time for R&R. Trust me, you do not want to miss this. There are limited spots available, so make sure to grab your spot now if you want to get away on this tropical adventure.
Well, let's, I have two questions for you that I think will be of particular interest to our audience. We have a huge variety of folks who listen to us, maybe 10% who are parents, maybe another 10% who are doula or midwife hopefuls, and then maybe 10% that are senior advanced midwives. But the huge bulk of our listeners are active students and new midwives. Okay. And I think in traveling and teaching nationally, maybe you see this too. I teach a lot in the US, and I would say there is, I think, a bit of lack of knowledge or understanding about how quickly it's all changed, I guess is the way I want to say. Like, when you come into something, you can only see what you can see. You're like, oh, this is normal, right? And so I wonder if you would take a moment and just kind of blow open the doors and tell us a little bit about the evolution in midwifery in the US in your lifetime. Like, what's different now? I know that's a huge question, isn't it? God,
Well,
okay, let me narrow it down.
well, I think I know what to say. I think I can,
Okay, go for
we
it.
succeeded in mainstreaming midwifery.
Do you think so?
Well, certainly more than being a criminal. I mean,
High
people,
five to that. Okay, so maybe legitimizing, but I don't think it's mainstream yet.
all right. Okay, there we go. Legitimizing is a better word. So we've done that. But now we have people coming into the profession that aren't coming into it in the same way as we did.
Yeah.
They're not coming to it as risk takers. They're not coming into it necessarily experiencing it as a calling. They're coming into it as a profession. They're paying good money for it, and they're more than willing to do what they're supposed to do. And so what I see happening there is what you fear is where, we could lose midwifery, and that, I mean, real midwifery, and turn it into midwifery, and that's pretty much where it could end up. So
well, like when we started, there's this whole body of knowledge around the edge, like you were saying, 44 weeks and 5 days. I personally carried to 44 weeks myself. Like there's this whole body of knowledge around the edge. And so prior to medical industrial takeover of the US in a big way, like 1930s, 1940s, where we were still in that transition time, there are stories of midwives all over the country who kept 2-pound babies alive using the oven and sock drawers and kangaroo care. There's stories of women being pregnant for a whole month later. There's stories of like wading through creeks to get this specific medicine herb that they can crush, like the fringe, the edge, the border.
Thinks of Elizabeth Gilmore, who founded National College. She used to get out on horseback with a rifle to some person.
Right. And this is how Frontier was founded. The same thing. Midwives on horseback. There's an incredible legacy of frontier midwifery in Alaska. Certainly it's incredible where we were just 50, 70 years ago.
Yeah.
So in the span of one lifetime, we have gone from really community-based midwives taking care of everyone that came to their doorstep. And that 50 to 70 years, our scope and our legitimacy has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until now there are state law about not being able to deliver breech babies, as if the breech baby reads the books or the law. Like you can't predict, you can't legislate out nature. So I think I don't know. I feel like new midwives, student midwives, may not grasp the enormity of the transformation.
Well, you are making me think of one of the assignments or even just observations I make in my first class. So now we're going from large to small, or I don't think it's small, but it's more particular.
Macro to micro. Yeah.
And I, by way of talking about the oppression of midwives, not just in the United States, but the long history of oppression, the Inquisition, etc., and why midwives were so threatening, and how that lineage we now know is genetically encoded, and how it's normal to fear being that kind of midwife. So exploring fear, giving an exercise to students on discovering how they lodge fear, working to evolve that. And then there's a point where I say, it used to be that midwives were usually the older ones in society. I'm not saying we need that now, because we need lots of midwives, and you're here at the right time. But they'd been through life. In fact, they'd experienced a lot of hardship, and many cultures, you can't be a healer without a wound. So what's your wound? Don't hide your wound. every one of us sitting in this circle today has a wound. Bear it with pride. Allow it to really inform your sensitivity and the way you connect with people. Work from your heart. That's a small step that I can make with each group of students to help them like almost remember midwifery, really connect with a deeper lineage of midwifery. I don't know what else we can do. I mean, if I can do the large going around the world and I can still do that micro, I hope that everyone watching will think about their connection to lineage and the honor of the wound and utilizing it constructively and recognizing that this work ultimately is sacred. It is a sacred charge. And if you work in that way with it, there's a way we receive information in tight spots with that open-heartedness and that consciousness. And midwives share this. They share, they talk about some particular nuance of complication that they didn't read about in any book. And there they are finding their hands guided to do certain, like, whoa, oh, I do this and then I do that. Okay. And it works. It does work because you're open to the field. You're not in this tight little box so just spreading that word, getting that word out.
Elizabeth, your words are magic. I agree wholeheartedly. I had an experience, actually. The first birth I attended without my preceptor was a surprise breech birth. She was a G6 and her baby was this floaty. So, he just floated bum first. And I had never done a breech with my preceptor either at that time. This was in 1999, I guess. And same thing. Yeah, my hands were like, oh, well, release the feet, and oh, we do this, and it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. There is this connection to universal flow if we can work on that connection, that intuition. I have an exercise on the front page of our website, midwiferywisdom.com, called the Sacred Yes and Holy No, and it's a way to calibrate intuition. Yeah, so we'll share that link as well in the show notes.
That's
so I mean, the more we can do that, the better, right? And there's so much that gets in the way of intuition these days.
Well, we do a lot on that, and the self-care that it takes to keep that channel open. Yeah, is I have experienced midwives come into my class near the end, and they all talk about self-care. They all talk about it, not like the kind of narrow sense of walk your talk, but the broad sense of personal health and well-being and rejuvenation, and ultimately the connection to the big space.
Well, it's such a pleasure hearing you speak. I read a quote on your website that listening to Elizabeth is like pure poetry, and I agree.
Thank you so
My
much.
last question for you today is to go from looking backwards to now look forward. And because we have this robust student and new midwife following base, what do you want them to pay close attention to? What do you want them to focus on? What do you want them to know?
Well, the macro, of course, is the international identity and keeping abreast of that. And the big picture, keeping the big picture in mind of, the one way I put it is, are you becoming the midwife you would want to have at your birth? And if you're not, you need to.
Ooh, that's tweetable. Ooh, that's so good. Okay, keep going.
And then there's that sustainability piece, and that's a huge piece for a lot of young people, because they don't want to martyr themselves because they're already in a tight spot financially. So I think of what happened in the Bay Area and founding the collective, which I just want to share because I think it's great. And what that is there are between, at any point in time, 5 and maybe 25 private practices. And everybody in the group agrees to volunteer to be assist for another midwife only for the critical moments of birth. California law requires two trained midwives at a birth. So if you worked in partnership, you'd have to divide the money in half, meaning you'd have to do more births. So instead, with this collective, it's a pool of midwives, and say that I'm the primary midwife, but I love working with so-and-so as my assist. I introduce her to the mama, the birthing pregnant person later in pregnancy, and she can say yes or no. And if she likes the person, great. And that assist comes only when the mother is fully active and nearing birth, stays through the birth to be that extra pair of hands if there's a dual emergency with mother and baby, and then is there in the immediate postpartum and goes home. So for that, the assist is paid 10% of the midwife's fee. So if your fee is $6,000, that assist gets $600, and the midwife keeps the rest and can keep her practice at a level that is manageable instead of getting crazy like I did for a while. I did 7 births a month, which is too many for a sole midwife to handle. So the collective model, and another beauty of that is you have a whole lot of midwives you can chat with about anything, like call them up in the middle of a labor and say, give me a check. I want to check in with you here. Do I know what I'm doing on this one?
Yeah.
Big holiday party, or, summer party in the park. Bring all the home birthers with their babies, or the pregnant one, bring them all together. Create community,
Yes.
That's a great model.
Yes. Oh, that's a great model. And that's a great suggestion, call to action, create community. I fully believe in that as well. We broke up for a quick second when you said how much was too much. So I think our listeners will want to know, when you said I got too busy, I had too much. What number is that?
7 births a month.
7 a month is too much for
primary. Okay. I'm doing all the prenatals, all the postpartums. Yeah. I
That's
mean, most midwives are gonna in private practice like that are gonna hover around 3 births a month, maybe.
Or maybe.
Yeah. And that's about it.
That's a good number. That's a good number. You're allowed to fully give to the client, and yet you don't lose yourself.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I feel like also the old midwifery adage is when you go over 8 a month, you start having duplicates.
I didn't know that.
Have you noticed that?
No, I never got that. I guess.
I was one of those midwives that was super busy for a time, but I think I agree with you. I think 3 to 7 is a sweet spot, and 4 or 5 is busy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you could do 1 or 2 months where it's 7, and then a few months where it's 2 or 3, and then your life would make sense. But when you start doing 8, 10, 12 a month, you don't have a personal life anymore, or your clients don't have a real midwife anymore. They have a clinician.
Right. Don't be afraid to take a break if it's time to take a break, because when you past your point, then you run into problems. That's where
preventable poor outcomes, actually. Preventable poor outcomes.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And you can step back from the work. In fact, I think most midwives find a way to take a break for at least a month. Some ideal vacation when you're kind of out of zone, and you have other people taking over your clients, not for the birth, but for the prenatals, et cetera, the follow-up.
Yeah.
And what I also say to my students is, you'll always be a midwife. Even if you're not doing births, you're doing well woman care, or you're writing a book, or as long as you identify as a midwife, you're a midwife.
Totally.
And also remember that midwife is not just a noun, it's a verb. So we midwife people in the supermarket line that see us holding a book on birth and start downloading their birth experience 30 years ago. I mean, we midwife in the executive world by being alert and compassionate and opening that big space for real solutions to come in. It's an amazing identity. It's such a gift.
It's a calling. I always say the only thing close to it is the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
You're never not a priest once you're a priest. Right. Yeah. And people talk to you day and night about all kinds of, like, you're always doing the thing. And that's how midwifery is too. We have a t-shirt that we made that is the definition of midwifery. And it says, number 1, a change agent. number two, a person who assists with transformation. And I feel like that's it. It's that simple. That's how we midwife people in business. Like I midwife people in business, and I midwife people on their soul journeys, and you midwife people in entering midwifery and all these things. Like it's massive.
I've done healing work like that myself, and I keep it on the lowdown, but definitely I've done that work. And it's a way of life. It's just a way of life, and it's a good way of life. It's such a good way, and I want to share it with everybody. I want everybody to have a chance to experience that.
Well, exactly. I've been dealing with some health issues, and I was trying to make an appointment with some new provider, and so I was brainstorming like some bottom line. It's like, what questions will I ask to see if this provider is going to be someone who can help me? And like, I was thinking about it. And then finally, like this sentence occurred to me, and I wrote it down, and it was like uninterrupted hour to discuss my case. And I wrote it down and I read it, and I was like, oh my God, that's midwifery. Like there's no physician in the world that's going to give me an uninterrupted hour. No. And it just made me really understand how we're totally at odds. Like actually the foundation of healthcare is care, and we're missing that in the medical industrial complex. Yeah. But that's what's so special about midwifery, is that we have this link, this connection, this space holding, and it's a way of life. Like you said, it's a way of life.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think medical people are still being taught the value of clinical detachment. And in midwifery, you really don't have clinical detachment. You don't want that. You want connection, as you said. And we have our body of expertise, our body of knowledge, and it's more available to us when we are connected, not when we try to stay artificially separate. And docs are taught to do that, and that's why they don't want to spend an hour with you, because they don't know what they do with it. Like, but again, I had experience back in those days you speak of, where I would transport to a hospital to a particular doctor. And the first thing he would say is, let's go talk out here. Tell me everything that's going on. He really wanted to know my work, my perspective. He ended up marrying a nurse midwife. It's interesting. But he truly had curiosity and wanted to get the big picture of what we were dealing with, and wanted to be informed of where we were going by me. So like the most amazing collaboration could ever ask for. And that too.
Amazing.
I wish everybody could have that.
I wish that too. Collaboration, connection. Well, Elizabeth, what a pleasure. It's just such an honor to know you and connect with you and share you with our listeners. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've had a wonderful time.
Big hugs. Thank you again.
Thank you too. All right. I'll talk to you again. Okay. Bye.